Hi, are you unsure about what are the costs with owning and maintaining a car in the UK? Then you need to watch this video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what are the costs with owning, operating and maintaining a car in the UK are.
Get strong.
Hello and welcome to The Nimble Nomad. My name is Arjun, and on this channel we talk about the tips, tricks and hacks to survive and thrive in the UK, and I share my personal experience with living life in the UK. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what are the costs associated with owning and operating a car in the UK, and I'm also going to be sharing some of the figures associated with the costs with a car based on my own personal experience. So the background is my wife and we bought our first car about a year ago, and the primary reason for buying that car was only because my wife needed the car in order to go to work every single day. We wouldn't have bought a car otherwise. I've always thought a car is an unnecessary luxury if you don't really have a use or need for it, just because of the operating costs associated with it. So for all of those people who haven't watched my video around what is the process I followed to select and find and buy my first car, I did a separate video about this a couple of weeks ago. So I'll add a link of this above there. If you are curious, then make sure to click that and watch that. One of the major factors that we considered when we were buying our car was what would be the annual maintenance costs associated with the car, and that was one of the reasons we chose the car that we ended up buying. So before I get into the specifics of all the costs that are associated with owning a car, what I'm going to do is, as I walk through each of the costs, I'm going to try and provide a pro tip which helps you out with actually managing the costs once you've purchased your car. So these are all points that are based on my own personal experience whilst buying a car or after I've bought the car. So is this worth considering when you're going to manage the costs of owning and operating a car? Okay, so let's dive into what are the actual costs associated with running cars and what is it that you need to think about and consider when you are planning to buy a car. So number one is insurance. Car insurance in the UK is definitely not cheap, and especially if you've never had a car or had any history of owning a car or no claims discount, then that car insurance gets progressively more expensive. So typically if you're buying a new car, you're either in your early or mid 20s, or you're a young couple like my wife and I were in your 30s without a car history in the UK. So in that scenario, the car insurance typically annually ends up being anywhere within the range of £1,500 to £2,000. And I'm just giving you an estimate. For my wife and I, the car insurance for the year was £1,700 something pounds. And that was primarily because we had no claims discount and also had never owned a car, and also my driving license was under 2 years. If you have a driving license which is under 2 years, then you're classified as not having a full license. But basically those factors drove up our car insurance. Now there's a whole bunch of other factors that go into defining how much your annual car insurance is going to cost, such as where you live, where the car is going to be parked, what kind of car it is, what are the power, how new it is, so on and so forth. All of those factors combined define what your total car insurance costs. So in our case, obviously it was £1,700. From what I've gauged based on the research for this video, I think if you're a first time car buyer or owner, then likelihood is that you're going to be in that range as well. Now, just before I move on to the next cost, one of the things that you can do in order to ease the pain with car insurances is, in the UK, you can choose to pay your car insurance either as a lump sum right at the beginning of the year, or you can choose to pay it off monthly, which breaks it down into smaller chunks. Just remember that if you do it in smaller chunks, you're technically taking a loan or hiring a contract with the car insurance company, so it will impact your credit score if you are concerned about that. Okay, so the second cost that's associated with owning a car is road tax. So in the UK, the way the road tax works is that it's an annual cost. So unlike some countries where you pay a one-time road tax when you buy the car, in the UK you pay an annual road tax. Now that depends completely on the type of car that you are purchasing and owning. So if you bought, if you bought a small hatchback, or if the cost is typically going to be less because the car occupies less space on the road and is likely to pollute lesser, versus a big SUV which occupies a bigger chunk of the road and has more carbon dioxide emissions from it. So the cost associated with road tax can be anywhere from 100 to 150 pounds all the way up to 500 to 600 pounds depending on the size of the car that you bought. Just in my own personal experience, our car actually did not have any road tax associated with it because we bought a hybrid car. Now, this was one of the main drivers to choose a hybrid car, was because typically on hybrids the road tax is really low or non-existent. And the reason our road tax is zero is because we bought a car before 2017. So the government in the UK had introduced new regulation on road tax requirements for hybrids from the year 2017. Any car which is manufactured as a hybrid car and registered before 2017 would not have to pay road tax. So our car actually is a 2016 Toyota hybrid, so we've not had to pay any road tax on it. So it's another factor to think about. That's, for us it was 150 pounds straight in our pocket rather than the government, so we chose to buy the car that we bought. Okay, so the next cost that's associated with owning a car is unfortunately a necessary evil or necessary cost. So this is basically the annual maintenance fees that you have to pay in order to maintain and service your car. So if you've ever owned a car, or if you're going to buy a car, one of the most important expenses with a car is maintaining and servicing the car. So every year, it's either every year or every 10,000 miles, whichever comes first, you will need to service your car, and that service fees is quite chunky if over a period of time. So depending on the type of car that you've purchased, the service fees varies quite a bit. So I've obviously bought a Toyota which is fairly reasonable in terms of servicing. The costs associated with servicing my car, there are two types of services. So there's a half service and there's a fully comprehensive service. The half service is about 150 pounds. I've just checked last month actually, and the full service is 330 pounds essentially. Now this unfortunately is a necessary evil. You can however choose to drive down these costs by not getting your car serviced at a dealership. A dealership always charges a bit of a premium just because they're the official brand. However, there's nothing different that the car servicing that the dealership does versus an ordinary garage. So you can do this at a independent garage, and the fees will probably be 100 or 120 pounds cheaper than what you would have paid if you did it through the dealership. Now the other thing to remember is usually when you get your car serviced, you're paying for the service and you're getting the service done. But what happens at these dealerships and any of the garages is they'll find other stuff for you to do as well. Now this is something that needs to be done unfortunately sometimes, or sometimes they just find stuff to get money under their hood. So I would always get a second opinion before you get any additional stuff done. So I actually had to recently do a software upgrade which was free, but then I was complaining about the air conditioning having a bit of a damp smell, and they actually charged me 120 pounds just to get the filter and the aircon regassed as a part of this. So it's something to just keep in mind, especially when you're going to dealerships. They'll always charge a bit of a premium, and they'll have some added add-ons on top of the service as well. So it's never the fees that you think you're going to pay for a service. Okay, so the next cost that's associated with owning and maintaining a car in the UK is the annual MOT check. So this MOT check only applies for cars which are 3 years and older. So the moment your car hits the 3rd year anniversary, you'll need to get the MOT check done. Now the MOT check is basically a safety check and is a government regulation and requirement, so you have to do it. There's no getting out of it. And basically what they do in the MOT is they check your car's tires, engine, different aspects like the brakes and all of that stuff, just to make sure that the car is actually roadworthy. And if there's anything wrong with it, then you'll have to get it changed so that it passes the MOT. And you have to pass the MOT in order to be able to drive your car. Otherwise, your car will be illegal on the road, essentially. The typical cost for an MOT, and this is straight from the government website, the maximum cost is about £54. Typically, the costs vary depending on where you're getting the MOT done. Either at a dealership will be slightly more versus a normal garage, which will be slightly lesser. Okay, so the next cost that I'm going to talk about is specifically applicable for those people who are living in London. And there's basically two costs, and these costs come straight from Transport for London, so TfL, which is the transport regulatory body in London. And the two costs are the congestion charge and the ULUs fees. So the congestion charge is basically this charge which is applicable by TfL, and the way it works is that in order to reduce the number of cars in central London or specific zones within London, the congestion charge applies. The congestion charge is applicable from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every single day of the year, except Christmas Day, because that's 1 year when people don't choose to drive. So that fees associated with the congestion charge is £15 per day. So if you were to drive your car every day into London during the congestion charge period, then you would be paying £15 per day for the period that you drove in. So every time you went into London on every day, you'd pay £15 on it. So it can get very expensive if you're choosing to drive into London. So that's one of the reasons why people don't drive in London, and they actually choose to use the tube or the public transport in order to get around in London. Okay, so the next fees that is taxed or applicable by TfL is ULUs, which is what I referred to earlier. So this is ultra low emission zone fees, and now this is a new fees which has been added in by TfL, and the reason why TfL enforced this was basically to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide or polluting gases within central London or within London. Now ULUs is basically applicable to most vehicles that drive into London, but there are exemptions. So if you're driving an electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, then your vehicle could be exempted from ULUs. And actually our car that we bought, which is a hybrid, incidentally is ULUs compliant, so we don't actually have to pay this ULUs fees either. Now the ULUs fees basically applies 24 hours a day, every single day, except Christmas Day as well. Now the charge for the ULUs fees is £12.50. So if your car is basically non-ULUs compliant and you chose to drive it into central London, into the congestion charge zone, then you'd basically be paying £27.50 per day to drive that car in London, and that's a huge fees for driving your car into London. So another thing to really think about, if you're ever going to buy a car and drive it into London, don't do it, is my own advice, just because it's so expensive. When we bought our car, we never actually intended to drive it into London, so these weren't actual factors, but I wanted a hybrid car just because one of the reasons for having a hybrid car is that it in fact gives you a higher mileage, so basically per gallon, and what that allows you to do is have higher fuel efficiencies. Now incidentally, obviously, through that indirect approach, I've actually become ULUs compliant, so I've actually saved on a cost if I ever need to drive into London. Obviously I'm not going to be doing that anytime soon, but it's a key factor to think about if you're buying a car and going to be using this every day. So the way you pay these congestion charge and ULUs fees is through the tfl.gov website. You create an account on there and you can set up auto pay. The cameras that are dotted around all over London basically have advanced capability to detect your number plate, and the registration of the number plate is obviously going to be towards your name or somebody in your family if you're driving that car around. and automatically through that registration, the card or debit card or credit card that you've got associated will get charged whenever you drive in. So that's the easiest way to pay it in. Or otherwise, what you can do it is retrospectively pay it after you've driven in. You'll get a notification for the charge. You just pay that fees through the TfL Gov website. So the next fees that you need to be aware of is the parking fees, and parking can be expensive depending on where you live. So there's two factors to parking. So one is obviously where you park your car on a daily basis when you go home, and the second one is where you park your car if you're driving around London or elsewhere in the country, essentially to do your shopping or anything else essentially. So usually most homes in the UK have off-street parking, and this is largely in the suburban areas. You'll be fine because you'll have off-street parking in your driveway, or you'll have free parking on the street. Now, if you're in a highly concentrated or densely populated area, what you will have is off-street parking. So basically you'll be parking on the street where all the other people are parking, but you need to have a parking permit. Now, the way you can get this parking permit is contact your local council, the guys you pay your council tax to, and pay this monthly or annual fee in order to get your parking permit essentially. And once you have the parking permit, you need to stick it in front of your on your dash so that you don't get fined or charged by the parking attendant. The annual permit usually for parking off street is anywhere between 100 and 150 pounds. Don't quote me on it, but it completely depends on your council and how much they charge. Of course, the higher the demand, the more the price will be. So the final cost associated with owning a car is obviously the fuel, and this cost completely depends on what your primary purpose for the car is. So in our case, my wife bought the car because she needed to commute with the car every single day. And so our costs obviously for fuel were quite significant because she was driving 70 miles per day to get to work and back home essentially. Now, the cost associated with fuel, every litre in the fuel at the time of filming this video costs about £1.15 for standard petrol, but if you're going to get the premium petrol, it costs about anywhere between £1.30 to £1.45 depending on wherever you're going to get your fuel filled. So that's it for this particular video. I just wanted to break down all the different costs associated with owning a car. As you can see, owning a car in the UK can be quite expensive when you add up all those costs, and especially if you're going to use that car to drive into London. Hopefully the points that I've talked about in this video help you out, and the pro tips that I've suggested along the video help you out as well. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the comments section below, and don't forget to smash that like button if this video helped you out. I'll keep coming back with great videos. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks very much and goodbye.